Most Americans have no idea what has just taken place. A recent unanimous decision by the Supreme Court, all 9 justices in agreement, has quietly changed the legal foundation of retirement across the entire country. Not just in one state or one pension system, but in every state. And the effects aren't limited to people who are already retired. This ruling reaches forward into the financial plans of anyone hoping to retire over the next 5, 10, or even 20 years. If you rely on a pension, contribute to a 401k, expect to receive Social Security, or chose your future retirement state based on tax rules, this decision may directly affect you. What makes it especially remarkable is not only the result, but the fact that justices from across the ideological spectrum, both conservative and liberal, signed onto the same constitutional principle. That kind of agreement is rare. When it does happen, it often signals that the court believed something fundamental needed to be clarified in the law. In this case, the core question was straightforward but incredibly important. Can state governments change retirement rules after people have already built their financial lives around those rules? For decades, many states have acted as though the answer was yes. Legislatures have adjusted pension formulas, raised retirement ages, added or expanded taxes on retirement income, and shifted financial assumptions that millions of workers and retirees depended on when planning their futures. This new Supreme Court decision, however, draws a much clearer boundary. It sets a national constitutional standard that may prevent governments from rewriting retirement rules in ways that hurt people who already made significant financial decisions based on the earlier framework. Put simply, the assumptions you used when planning your retirement may now have legal weight they did not clearly have before. That is why legal analysts are calling this one of the most consequential retirement decisions in many years. To see why this matters and how it might affect you personally, we need to look at the case that brought the issue to the Supreme Court, a case that began with a single retiree challenging a state law. Hi, I'm Olivia, and here on the USA Guide, we take complex legal and financial developments and translate them into clear, practical insights that matter for your retirement, your savings, and your long-term security. A lot of the decisions that shape retirees' lives don't start as big headlines. They begin quietly in legislatures and courtrooms, and by the time they filter into the news, their financial impact is already underway. That's why understanding this Supreme Court ruling now, not years from now, is so important. In the next few minutes, I'll walk through what the court actually decided, why all 9 justices agreed, and how this standard could affect retirement taxes, pension protections, and long-term planning across all 50 states. We'll also look at which groups are likely to see the strongest protections and what practical steps you may want to consider to better safeguard your own retirement strategy. This case didn't begin as a national battle over retirement policy. It started as what looked like a fairly ordinary disagreement between one retiree and a state government. The retiree argued that the state had changed the rules governing retirement benefits after people had already spent years structuring their financial futures based on an earlier set of rules. The state responded with a familiar argument that governments have used for years, that they need flexibility to adjust retirement-related laws as conditions change. Legislators, the state claimed, must be able to modify tax codes, pension formulas, and financial regulations when economic or budget realities shift. From that point of view, retirement rules are just one part of a larger tax and budget system that governments must manage as needs arise. The retirees saw it differently. From their perspective, retirement planning is not a short-term choice. It's the result of decades of saving, contributing, calculating, and making life decisions in reliance on the legal framework in place at the time. People choose when to retire, how much to set aside, what types of accounts to use, and even where to live based on those rules. Their argument boiled down to a simple but powerful idea. If the government encourages people to plan for retirement under a specific set of laws, it should not be allowed to later change those laws in a way that harms the very people who relied on them. That claim moved through lower courts and eventually reached the Supreme Court. When the justices took up the case, they did more than resolve a single retiree's complaint. They used it to set a national constitutional standard. In a unanimous decision, the court sided with the retiree and held that governments cannot simply rewrite retirement rules in ways that retroactively damage people who made financial decisions based on prior law. While that might sound technical, the implications are substantial. Retirement planning is built on long-term expectations. People don't just accumulate savings, they design full strategies informed by tax treatment, pension formulas, retirement ages, and benefit calculations they expect to remain relatively stable. When those rules change abruptly, it can derail financial plans that took decades to build. The court signaled that this type of disruption now deserves stronger constitutional protection. At the center of the ruling is a concept known as reliance interests. It's a legal term, but the underlying idea is straightforward. When people make major life decisions in reliance on existing law, the government cannot later change those laws in a way that unfairly harms those who relied on them. Put in everyday language, it means you shouldn't have the rules changed on you after you've already played by them, at least not in a way that meaningfully hurts you. The justices highlighted retirement planning as one of the clearest examples of this principle. Consider what goes into it. Over the course of a working life, someone might spend decades contributing to a pension system, funding a 401k, or selecting investments based on how withdrawals will be taxed later. They might relocate to a state specifically because it offers favorable treatment of pension income or retirement savings. They might aim for a particular retirement age because that's when full benefits become available. Each of those decisions rests on the assumption that the legal rules governing retirement will remain reasonably consistent. Before this ruling, states had broad latitude to change those rules. They could alter pension formulas, impose new taxes on certain types of retirement income, or modify benefit structures in ways that impacted people who had already built their plans around the old system. Sometimes the changes were modest. Other times they were significant enough to reshape an individual's entire retirement picture. The Supreme Court's decision now requires a much higher constitutional standard for those kinds of retroactive shifts. If a state wants to change retirement laws in a way that harms people who relied on the prior system, the state must now justify that change under a strict legal analysis. Importantly, the burden of proof has effectively shifted. Rather than retirees bearing the primary weight of challenging a policy, the state must now demonstrate that its actions are constitutionally justified in light of individuals' reliance on previous law. In legal terms, that's a major change. It recognizes, for the first time in such explicit terms, that retirement planning decisions made by millions of Americans are interests serious enough to merit constitutional protection. To see why this matters in practice, think about how retirement planning unfolds in the real world. Imagine someone who spent 3 decades contributing to a public pension system that promised a particular formula for calculating benefits. Or take a person who saved diligently in a retirement account because their state did not tax certain distributions, and even moved later in life to take advantage of that policy. For many, those legal rules are central to decisions about when to stop working, how much to save, and where to live. Under the old framework, legislatures could sometimes alter those key rules after people had already structured their lives around them, adding new taxes, changing benefit formulas, or introducing penalties that didn't exist when contributions were made. Governments often defended such changes as routine exercises of their tax and budget authority. Under the reliance-based standard the court has now embraced, those justifications face a much tougher test. If a retiree chose a state or a benefit structure because of a clear legal promise, such as no tax on pension income, the government cannot easily reverse that promise and expect affected individuals to absorb the impact without further scrutiny. The court recognized that retirement planning reflects long-term trust in the legal system. People are not just making financial choices, they are relying on government-created rules to organize decades of their lives. Changing those rules retroactively can uproot entire financial futures. That's why the justices concluded that governments must respect the reliance individuals place on the framework that existed when their decisions were made. What's more, the ruling is not limited to those who are already retired. It also covers people who are still in the planning phase. Consider someone in mid-career, steadily contributing to a 401k or an IRA year after year. Those contributions rest on expectations about future taxation, withdrawal rules, and the legal environment in retirement. People decide how much to save and how long to work based on those expectations. Before this decision, some aspects of that framework could be altered later in ways that undercut those long-term plans. The new standard indicates that when people commit to a strategy in good faith based on current law, their reliance on that law now carries constitutional weight. That means today's contributions and planning choices may be better protected against certain types of retroactive policy changes. To operationalize this protection, the Supreme Court didn't stop at describing reliance interests in abstract terms. The justices outlined a three-part constitutional test that states must meet before changing retirement-related laws that affect people who have already relied on prior rules. First, courts must ask whether individuals actually made financial decisions based on the previous law. This looks at whether people saved, relocated, contributed, or structured their retirement plans under the assumption that particular rules would remain in place. Second, they consider whether the proposed change would materially harm those individuals by significantly reducing benefits, increasing taxes, or otherwise damaging plans built under the former system. Third, they examine whether the state has a compelling justification strong enough to outweigh that harm. It is no longer enough for a state to say it wants to tweak its budget or modernize a tax schedule. The rationale must be robust enough to pass constitutional scrutiny in light of the reliance people placed on the old rules. Crucially, the burden is now on the state to satisfy each part of this test. Before, retirees often had to initiate lawsuits, fund legal challenges, and try to prove that a state had gone too far. Under the new framework, the presumption starts with the individual's reliance, and the state must justify its changes. That shift significantly strengthens the position of retirees and workers planning for retirement. It transforms them from largely reactive challengers into rights holders whose expectations must be respected unless the government can make a strong case otherwise. From a practical standpoint, what can you do with this information? One key step is to carefully document the rules you are currently relying on in your retirement planning. That might sound mundane, but maintaining records of your state's current tax treatment of pensions, Social Security, and retirement account withdrawals could be valuable if laws ever shift. Saving official descriptions of pension formulas, benefit promises from employers, and current tax policies, whether as printouts, PDFs, or screenshots, can help establish what you reasonably relied on when shaping your financial future. It can also be helpful to organize and keep key documents related to your retirement accounts and benefit programs, enrollment forms, account statements, employer communications about benefits, and summaries of plan rules. All of this builds a clear timeline showing that your choices were made under a specific set of expectations. In addition, consulting with a financial professional who understands how legal developments intersect with retirement planning can be useful. Not every advisor will be fully up to speed on this ruling right away, but those who follow legal and policy changes will already be thinking about how the new reliance standard might affect contribution strategies, withdrawal plans, and state tax considerations. For public employees, reviewing pension plan documents and any recent legislative changes to benefit structures can help identify areas where the new standard might offer stronger protection. For those who relocated in retirement because of favorable tax rules, maintaining clear evidence of when and why that move was made may be especially important. It's also worth noting that this ruling does not completely freeze retirement policy in place. States still retain the authority to adjust their laws, but they must now do so within the boundaries of this constitutional standard. Some governments may respond with measures like grandfathering, protecting current retirees under old rules while applying new policies only to future workers, or by phasing in changes slowly. Courts will ultimately decide which approaches stay within the line the Supreme Court has drawn. In broader terms, this decision sends a clear signal about fairness and long-term planning. Retirement is the product of decades of effort, not a last-minute choice. People base major life decisions on the laws that exist at the time: how much to save, how long to work, where to live, and when to stop working. The court's ruling acknowledges that the trust people place in those laws is not something the government can casually disregard. The real impact of this decision will unfold over the coming years as states respond, additional cases arise, and lower courts apply the new standard. But even now, understanding the principle of reliance and documenting how it applies to your own planning can give you a stronger foundation for your retirement decisions. This video is for educational purposes only and is not legal or financial advice. Always do your own research and consult qualified professionals before making decisions about your retirement or tax strategy.